What to do when your significant other is battling clinical depression. Hi, this is going to be a rather long text, so thank you in advance to anyone who may come across this post and taking the time to reading through it. My significant other has been battling clinical depression, going to a therapist as well as psychiatrist, plus taking meds, for a couple of years now, so I've known about his overall condition way before we became romantically involved, about a year and a half ago. I have to admit it was going to be a challenge, but I did not realize just how limited my knowledge on the subject was and how hard it is for him to live with this condition, especially during COVID. Most of the time, I'm able to think positively and not lose my patience. I care for him very deeply, and I always try my best to put myself in his place if I ever get frustrated, mainly because he can't get out of bed until the evening, which unfortunately is the case for most of the days. He's currently taking a break from his studies due to his declining condition for the past year. I understand how hard it is sometimes to get out of bed, especially when there is nothing to look forward to and when only despair and hopelessness await. I understand that very often when he is awake, he wants nothing more but to distract himself from reality with WoW. I do understand it. I'm aware that fighting depression can be a very long and repetitive process and that improvements can't be felt from one day to another. But recently, the hopelessness has got to me, and I can't help but feel overwhelmed sometimes. I've noticed that on several occasions, I couldn't contain my frustration anymore. I feel as if nothing has changed since the beginning. I've decided that changes have to be made, if not from his side, at the very least from mine. But how? Up until now, I've only tried to be merely there for him emotionally, offering him words of encouragement when he is at his very low. I try to encourage him to socialize or to take a walk with him to get some fresh air or to partake in activities besides playing WoW. But I never force him to do anything he is not feeling like doing. I try to get him out of bed every day. I try my very best to make sure that at the very least, he doesn't have to worry about having no clean clothes to wear or warm meals to eat. We've been living together for some time now. Should I start forcing him to do things I know for a fact will better his condition in the long run, like getting out of bed on time, having daily routine he can stick to, restricting his screen time, getting fresh air on a daily basis? But I fear by doing so, I will be adding to his stress and suffocating him metaphorically. I fear I will be taking on the role of his mother instead of his romantic partner. I fear by taking on a wrong approach on supporting him, I will leave irreversible damage on his mental health or unnecessarily prolong his battle with depression and on our relationship. Okay. Very critical post. Fantastic. Okay. Really important. So let's try to understand this. So if you're in a relationship with someone who has a mental illness, it's one of the hardest things to do, right? Because you know that they're ill. So if they're depressed, they have trouble getting out of bed. And you want to be supportive, right? Like, because the right thing to do, the way to be a good partner in this situation is to be like caring and supportive. The least I can do is try to encourage him, right? But you don't want to like hurt him, right? Because you know that there's depression. So if you push him too far and he can't do it because he's depressed, it's like if I have someone who's handicapped and can't walk and I'm yelling at them to like get out of the wheelchair and climb the stairs, like that's an asshole thing to do. And so when it comes to depression, the disability that people experience is like getting out of bed, right? It's like being able to work, being able to focus, being able to get an erection. Like, so then you're really stuck in this scenario where, you know, you want to be supportive, you want to help them, you don't want to be mean, right? You don't want to force them into things, you don't want to make things worse. So you try to be like unrelentingly positive, right? I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be empathic. I'm going to make sure they get like warm meals because they're not taking care of themselves. Like I'm going to take care of them because they can't take care of themselves. And this goes on for a while. And then like suddenly like you get into this weird situation where as a caregiver, you're not sure what to do because despite all this, the support and all the love and all the patience, like they don't seem to be getting better and you're starting to run out of patience. And so then like this whole wave of negative emotions then starts to come up. Like you feel like a bad person because you are running out of patience with someone who's ill, right? Like they're ill, it's not their fault and you should be patient because to be patient is to be good. And if I'm losing my patience, then that means I'm bad. And that means I'm not being a supportive girlfriend. So then that means that like I need to be better, right? And we can see that even in this post. Like you can look at it right here, where the person is acknowledging that like, you know, where is it? So like, you know, should I, hold on. I've tried to decide, be there emotionally, but I never force him. I feel like I'm trying to my very best. Should I start forcing him? Add to stress. I fear that taking on the role, I fear by taking the wrong approach in support of him, I will leave irreversible damage. Yeah, but recently the hopelessness has got to me. This is the sentence I'm looking for, right? So at some point it starts to cost you something. And then what happens is you feel guilty because like let's say, so I know that, you know, if you post something like this on the internet, in the majority of places, you know, you'll get very drastic responses. So like in certain places, like, and you may notice you had this response, like, dump this guy. Like, this guy is a complete waste of space. Like, you deserve better. You're a good person. You deserve better. Like, move on with your life. This person doesn't deserve this from you, right? Like, you're babying them. Like, this person needs to grow up. So you're going to get that kind of response. You'll also get communities where people will say that, you know, the opposite is true, where like people will be like, if someone is ill, like you can't abandon them. And then you feel guilty because if you think about breaking up, you're not enjoying this relationship anymore because they're ill. And then you feel like an ass for breaking up with them because you don't enjoy it because they're ill. Like, that's not their fault. And then you kind of feel petty. So there's, you know, trying to do a good job and being a supportive partner. And then there's the guilt that comes with the inevitable cost that you pay. And then the last thing is like the uncertainty and the frustration of like, what do I do here, right? Like, am I doing too much? Am I enabling him? Like, how do I know if someone is depressed if I'm enabling them? Because if you're enabling them, then you're, by supporting them, you're hurting them, right? You're hurting them and yourself. But like, if you're not enabling them and they really can't do it without your support, maybe they'd crumple completely. So like, if you know, push them harder, are you going to like damage things irreversibly like this person is afraid of? Or by continuing your course, are you enabling bad behavior, right? And this is like, it's so hard to figure out because either thing you do, whether you're a good person or a bad person, it could be the wrong thing and you could be screwing things up. It's so difficult. And so when then what ends up happening is people sort of like decide, right? Like, okay, well, if I don't really know what to do, what I'm going to settle on is the thing that like I can absolutely put my compass behind, which is like, be better myself. Be more patient, be more supportive. Like, we all know that those things are absolutely good things, right? So like in the uncertainty of not knowing if I'm enabling him or if I'm supposed to push him or like what's going on, like, let me at least know to do what I know to do is good, which is like be patient and be a good person and suck it up and be there for him and don't abandon them. Because abandonment we're pretty sure is bad, right? So let me like not do that, right? And so this is where people end up. So first thing is caregiver burnout is very real. We talk a lot about, so there's a ton of research on caregiver burnout when it comes to cancer. I think one of the things that is woefully understudied in the field of medicine is caregiver burnout with relation to mental illness, and including things like addiction. So in order to understand, you know, what the right move is here, the first thing that we've got to do is understand your internal environment, which we kind of did, right? You want to be a good supportive partner, so you're going to be patient, you're going to cook meals, you're going to do laundry, you're going to do all this kind of stuff, which by the way is kind of mother stuff, by the way, FYI, right? And then you feel guilty for like wanting to set limits, for being frustrated yourself. You feel like a bad person. Then you kind of like feel stuck because you don't know what to do. So the next thing to understand here is that in this situation, we've got more than depression going on. So I'm going to share with y'all something, and this is, when we're talking about research, I feel pretty good about this because this is like literally my day job, right? So I did a lot of learning about this. So I think this sounds to me like a situation where we've got actually like a dual diagnosis situation. So I'm not diagnosing this person with anything, but this is what these kinds of situations look like to me, okay? So there's a lot of questions you have to ask to really make sure that this is, first of all, clinical depression. We don't really know this person's medical record, so we're taking that at face value. And then there's also like this problematic gaming. But this absolutely smells to me like a dual diagnosis situation. And this is what makes the situation hard. So if we look at depression, depression tends to lasts about a year, okay? So clinical depression tends to be a organic, and by that I mean a biological process that tends to last about 1 year. So we see a neurochemistry change, and if you guys have not watched Dr. K's Guide to Depression, we go into a ton of detail about this. So highly, highly, highly recommend that. So we'll go, but I'm going to talk about it some here. But clinical depression is like a neurochemistry imbalance that affects things like your energy level and stuff like that, and lasts for about a year. So the main thing about clinical depression is that it tends to last up to 1 year. So the natural course of people who have traditional clinical depression, which is major depressive disorder, the most common form of contributor to clinical depression, is we see a normal life cycle of like depression and feeling good. So like this is the baseline. So here's an episode of depression. Here's an episode of depression. But then they should feel like relatively normal in this window and in this window. Okay? So what I'm hearing is that this person has been in this relationship for 1.5 years and it hasn't really gotten better, which suggests to me that there's more going on here than clinical depression. So if we see a scenario that is essentially like this, right? Where actually, let me redo that. So when we see a scenario that's more like this, where, you know, here's the baseline that we're shooting for, and this person is kind of like there, okay? And they never rise above. Like there's never like a moment where they go above, okay? This tells me this is very common for something called dual diagnosis. And what happens in dual diagnosis is we have a suppressing influence on these parts, okay? And usually dual diagnosis refers to substance use, okay? So when we've got someone who is an alcoholic and has clinical depression, we see this picture of years of people being depressed. All right. So like essentially what's going on, and I think what's going on here is the gaming, right? So let's just imagine a scenario where, you know, this is their baseline. Normally what should happen is they should go like this, right? But if they have bad video gaming habits, like they wake up at nighttime and they play WoW all night, and then they go to bed early in the morning, they're going to be negatively impacting their circadian rhythm. They're not going to be exercising. Right? There's like the negative, like dopaminergic effects of gaming. So they're going to feel bored or unmotivated. So what this results in is like motivational problems or boredom in other parts of life. So when they should be able to like get back on their feet, like essentially what's happening is the gaming is actually like creating a suppressing influence that kind of keeps them there. And then even when the gaming influence kind of wears off, then what happens is the depression starts again. So this is the white line is the depression. And then we're into our second depressive episode. Okay? And so what we end up with is essentially like periods of time where we are constantly like not doing well. So like there are good examples of things that are actually the opposite of this, right? So, and it's going to sound kind of weird. So if I'm depressed, okay, there's data that shows that having a pet is protective against depression. So even if I'm clinically depressed, having a pet does this. And then if we think about, well, like what is the effect of having a pet, right? So there's like emotional support, sure. But then what else does a pet do? A pet forces you to leave the house. Right? If I've got a dog, I've got to go for like 2 walks a day. Like it's getting me out. It's getting me exposure to vitamin D, which by the way, vitamin D deficiency is a risk factor for depression. Gamers are more likely to be vitamin D deficient. Right? So we get more vitamin D, like we're engaging with other things. Like we're forced to take care of things, right? So we have to wake up on time. Right? Like we have to do all kinds of things that adhere to some kind of regular schedule because we have a pet. And then this in turn, you know, has positive impacts on our circadian rhythm and then buffers against the effects of depression. So what I'm really sniffing here is that this is not just a depression problem, it's a depression plus gaming problem. And the other thing that we understand about dual diagnosis is that dual diagnosis treatment of one thing is ineffective. Okay? So now we also see a couple of other things. So like solo treatment, TX stands for treatment, doesn't work. So in the case of alcohol and depression, let's talk about this, right? So I can start someone on an SSRI, but when they have the CNS, central nervous system, depressant effects of alcohol, wow, that handwriting is particularly bad. When you have the CNS depressant effects of alcohol, it sort of counters the SSRI or the antidepressant medication. Right? Because the alcohol is a CNS depressant. It's going to like make you depressed. Right? Because people who drink or like get mopey and stuff like that. And then this in turn, like if you get drunk and you're hungover and stuff like that, it's going to be hard to hold a job. If it's hard to hold a job, like you're not going to wake up on time, and then like your depression has free reign. So it's almost like the alcohol and like depression work in concert to keep you down. And we see the same thing with gaming as well. And this is a pattern that I've seen over and over again. So since solo treatment doesn't work, we get this picture of I've been in treatment for years and I'm not getting better. It doesn't work. Right? And we sort of see that in this case too, where this person appears to have been like, you know, in treatment for a couple of years, but their situation does not appear to be getting better. So people will conclude that treatment is not effective. Whereas what's really going on is it's not that treatment isn't effective, it's that there's a dual diagnosis issue that is preventing treatment from being effective. So the flip side of this is also true. Well, you can say like, okay, fine. So alcohol negatively impacts the effects of antidepressant treatment, but does it work both ways? And the answer is absolutely yes. So if I'm sober, right, and I have untreated depression, I start being sober. I've been sober for 6 months. And I start to get depressed. MDD kicks in. I get depressed. And now I feel bad all the time. What am I going to do? I'm going to start drinking. Right? Because you use alcohol as a coping mechanism. So as the MDD kicks in, you relapse. So we also see this issue with people who are struggling to be sober. So people, you know, remember how we said like treatment doesn't work? So like have difficulty being sober. And why is that? It's because every time you make progress on the sobriety, the depression kicks in and like knocks your feet out from under you. So then what happened is like clinicians basically figured out that the right way to treat this is like you have to treat both at once. You cannot just make someone sober and then like leave them on their own because the depression is going to kick in and is going to knock their feet out from under them. So you have to make them sober and treat the depression at the same time. And the flip side is also true. That like if you want to manage the depression, you're going to have to deal with the addiction. And so what I'm sort of seeing in a situation like this is that like there's no limits on the gaming. And the gaming is actually like propagating and worsening the depression. That would be my guess from this amount of information. Now to truly make a diagnosis, I have to do like a diagnostic interview, right? So I have to ask about frequency, duration of gaming, how long has this been going on? You know, do you experience episodes of depression? Do you not experience episodes of depression? Even in the video gaming, are there times like over the last year and a half where you've been particularly worse, like were there times where you weren't even able to play WoW? So there's 1,000 questions that you have to go into before making a diagnosis. So when we say we don't make diagnoses on stream, we're not just saying that as a disclaimer. It's like literally like you cannot do that unless you collect this kind of information, right? At the same time, based on my clinical experience, I've seen situations like this, and sometimes in situations like this is what it ends up being. So now the question is like, what do you do about it as a partner, right? What does the partner do? And so this is where I think that unfortunately, like you should probably start setting limits, right? This is the kind of thing where like, you know, this is the real challenge of being a partner, is that you want to be supportive towards someone who has a mental illness. But you have to walk the very fine line of being supportive without taking responsibility. And this is where partners trip up. So you start to become responsible for their lives. And this is really tricky. So as a psychiatrist, like I'll have patients with bipolar disorder, right? And so like I expect my patients to show up on time. So like I have appointment like policies, right? Where if it's like, if you don't cancel within 24 hours, you get billed for the appointment or whatever. Like I need notice of a cancellation, right? And if you just serially don't show up for appointments, then I'm like not going to be your doctor anymore, right? Because I have no idea what's going on. Now that's tricky because if you're a psychiatrist, like literally the disease manifests in your patients as like not being able to show up to appointments. The disease manifests as having difficulty sleeping, going manic, and going on a gambling binge 3 states away, so they don't show up there for their appointment. So how do you navigate like the fact that you have to make allowances for this person because they have a mental illness, and at the same time still maintain some kind of healthy relationship? And so this is where, you know, like I expect my patients to take responsibility. So I don't blame them for getting ill, but the question is like, did you stop taking your medication? Did you start using again? Did you like, what is your hand in this stuff? Because this is what I've learned as a clinician, and this is what I would say to all the partners out there who are, you know, dating someone who has mental illness, is that you can't fix them. You can't take all of the, like this relationship is never going to work if they are not invested and responsible and working towards it. Now, it can be hard to get out of bed. I'm not unsympathetic to that. So sometimes I'll have like patients who will, you know, call me the morning of and they're saying, my depression is really bad today. Like I can't make my appointment. And I'm not going to bill them if it's like 3 hours before the appointment because I recognize that that's a thing, right? So I have a policy, but whether I enforce it or not is sort of depends on the person. But I still expect a certain amount of like responsibility. So I understand that you're feeling bad today, but I have a life too, right? And like, you owe something to me in this relationship. I'm not talking like, you know, as your psychiatrist, like there's a certain amount of work you have to do as a patient. So I can do so much as your psychiatrist. I can show up on time. I can be compassionate towards you. I can be patient. I can prescribe medication. I can review your medical record. But you have some role to play. Like you can't show up in my office and then like leave once and then expect me to fix everything in your life. That's not how it works. I mean, people have tried that. It just doesn't work. Like you cannot fix another human being. So I have to do my part. I have to do my dharma in this relationship as a treater. And the patient has to do that as well. And so this is where, like, if you've got a partner who's doing this, like, I understand that, you know, let me find this. Yeah, so like this is where, you know, but I never force him to do anything that he is not feeling like doing, right? Like all he wants, he doesn't feel like doing something. And so this is where like I'd say that if you have mental illness, you have the responsibility of learning how to do things that you don't feel like doing. In fact, you don't need mental illness to have that responsibility. I think that's a human responsibility. Right? And this is what's so hard is like, how do we hold that boundary with compassion? We're not saying, you know, break up with him unless he does X, Y, Z, but this is absolutely a situation where I think that, you know, so your patience towards them, I'm not sure that that's helping them. Because at this point, we're at the 1.5 year mark. This is really important, right? So if you're at the 6 month mark, I would say it's reasonable to be like, give it 6 months. But if we're outside of the window of a clinically depressive episode, then there are other factors at play. If you yourself are starting to burn out, right? That you can't contain your frustration anymore, like this is starting to impact the relationship. You cannot carry the relationship all on your own, right? That's the key thing. A relationship cannot be carried by just one person. It requires both people's effort. And what I'm getting the sense of from this post is that your boyfriend absolutely has clinical depression and he deserves compassion for that. Your boyfriend absolutely has, you know, an unhealthy relationship with World of Warcraft, which you should have compassion for. And I'm not entirely sure that they're giving it 100%. And I think that's partially because you've started taking responsibility for them. Like, This is the kind of thing where, like, despite depression, they should be able to do some things, unless it's like absolutely crippling that they can't get out of bed. But if they have the ability to get out of bed and play WoW, like, they have the ability to do other things. And I understand that they don't feel like it. And this is the other challenge with depression, right? Is that you don't feel like doing stuff. So it makes people like feel anhedonic. So doing like some things is harder, which I totally get. But there's also an evidence-based intervention for depression called behavioral activation. And behavioral activation is getting depressed people to do stuff. And what we discover through behavioral activation is when depressed people start to do stuff, it actually improves their depression. And just like it's a vicious cycle on the way down, it can be a vicious cycle on the way up, right? Like, you can start to really buoy yourself. So this is the kind of thing where if you're in this situation, and you've been at this for a year and things don't seem to be getting better, this is what's really hard. Is if you sit down and you have a conversation with your boyfriend, and you say like, hey, this is not working, they're going to feel super bad about themselves. It's going to like activate all their depression and all that kind of crap. Right. And that's legitimate. Right. So they're going to start to maybe feel suicidal or whatever, because they understand that they are letting you down, and the depression is going to feed on that. Right. And so that's where like the conversation is difficult, but like you have to have some kind of like limit setting conversation where you can say, look, this is what I need from you in a relationship. What are you actually like? What can you do? Like, is this like, are you telling me that this is the most you can do, or is there anything else that you can do? You don't have to start big. We're not saying give up WoW. We're not saying wake up at 6 a.m. every day. But the key thing is to set some kind of limits. Like, I'm happy to cook for you, but like, I want you to be with me in the kitchen when I'm cooking. If you don't have the energy to chop anything, that's fine. If you don't have the energy to work, that's fine. But all I expect is that your ass, instead of playing WoW, your ass shouldn't be in your computer chair. It should be keeping me company in the kitchen. So those are the kinds of limits which I think it's completely appropriate to set. Right? You're not asking for their work. You're asking for like their presence and their effort and their willingness to try. If you can't wake up every day, that's totally fine. If you can't wake up at 8, like, wake up at noon. If you have trouble sleeping, I'm not unsympathetic to that. I get that it's hard to wake up. But when you wake up, what I need from you in a relationship is like for us to go on 1 date a week. Like, you decide when it is. But like, I need something. And I recognize that saying this stuff to you may hurt you, may make you feel like you're worthless. The point is, I don't think you're worthless. And at the same time, like, what determines whether you're worthless is like what you end up doing when I share this with you, right? I want you to care about me, and I want you to like try harder at making me happy in this relationship, because I want to be in the relationship. Now, their depressed mind could spiral out of control here, and you can say like, if you're feeling really bad about this, I strongly recommend you talk to your therapist about it. I'm happy to come to your appointment too if you want that. We can talk about it in your therapist's office. But the point is that I care about this relationship. I love you. I want to see it succeed, and I can't continue doing this forever. Right? So like, I want us to work on this together. That's what this message really is. It's not saying that you're insufficient. It's saying that I need your help. And there's a big subtle difference between, once again, supporting someone and taking responsibility, and saying you are not good enough and I need your help. And that's really the message that I think you need to get across to like your partner, right? Which is that you can't carry this by yourself. And even if they feel ashamed, like, that's okay. Like, there's some stuff that I imagine you can do. And if you can't even do that, like, you tell me what you can do, because I'm doing everything that I can. And there's also other tricky things. Like, sometimes people just sort of passively go to, like, therapy and don't really do the work there. There are also more drastic measures, right? Like uninstalling WoW. Like, oh my goodness. And that's the really tricky thing, is that if you're a partner and you're sort of dealing with a dual diagnosis situation, like, sometimes you have to take drastic measures, right? And then like, if the person says, well, like, WoW is the only thing that keeps me from being suicidal. Okay, so like, maybe you're not ready to uninstall WoW yet, but like, I need you to be in the kitchen. I want to go on 1 date a week. Like, even if you don't enjoy it, I need this from you. And this is the last thing that I know sounds kind of devastating, but, if the person isn't able to do, like, I would give it a year. It sounds like you're committed to this person. So like, I would give it a year. I would try to be patient, but at some point, I don't think that you have to commit to being in a relationship with this person. I'm not saying you should break up with them, but I'm sort of saying that like if this is the relationship that you want, then this is the relationship that you're going to get. And in my experience, if you want to have a healthy, successful relationship, it demands change on both members of the relationship over the course of the relationship. Right? It's not like you just change once. It's like you have continuous change, week to week, month to month, year to year. The demands of the relationship change. The demands of the people change. The needs of the relationship change. Right? That's what a committed relationship is about. It's not like getting married based on the circumstances today. It's like getting married and recognizing that no matter what the circumstances are, good or bad, we're going to work at it, right? And we're going to find a way to figure it out. But in order for a marriage to work, it can't just be all bad. It has to be good. And we're not talking about marriage in this situation, so I'm just sort of using that as a substitute for a committed relationship. But if this has been going on for a year and a half, like, I don't know how much patience you've got left. Like, your tank sounds like you're starting to run on empty, right? And then you're stuck in this relationship because you feel guilty for abandoning them, and then you resent them, but you don't allow yourself those feelings of resentment and anger towards them because they're ill. And then you end up hating yourself because you're such an asshole, because you feel frustrated towards someone who's ill. And then that eats the relationship on the inside, and it's not like it's dead anyway. So people are saying, oh my God, like 1 year is so generous. Like, I get that y'all feel that way, but I think that what I'm hearing from this person is that they're very committed to trying to make this work. And I think that this is not something you fix in 6 weeks, right? This is the kind of thing that takes like a lot of time and a lot of patience. And, you know, I tend to advocate for trying to make things work as opposed to just moving on and looking for something better. But at the same time, there's got to be some kind of limit, right? So like even in my practice, I'll give people passes. Absolutely. I'll try to make things work. But if someone like repeatedly no-shows after we have these kinds of conversations, it's not like a number. But like, so for example, generally speaking, I kind of think about like 3 no-shows in a row before I start to, you know, think about terminating with someone. But then I also kind of acknowledge that depression can last for a couple months and someone can have a really bad month. And so they're going to miss like 3 appointments in a row. That usually doesn't happen like that, but they miss one appointment. If they've fallen off the face of the earth, they don't make the next one, right? So it's really only one missed appointment. But I think there's like, we should be patient with people, but we should also like respect our own limits and boundaries, right? We're not divine, where like we're an endless source of patience. And furthermore, I don't know that an endless source of patience actually is the best thing for people. So you don't want to be endlessly patient with your kids, right? Like if my kid walks up to me and starts smacking me across the face, I don't just want to like allow them to do that behavior, right? I want to teach them that you have to set limits on stuff. Like there are consequences for your actions. And so in that same way, what I'm sort of getting the sense of is that based on your love, based on your guilt, based on your appreciation and respect for people with mental health issues, you've started to really start to take responsibility for his well-being. And when you've taken the responsibility for his well-being, he's stopped taking responsibility for the well-being. And I don't know that that's a great prognostic sign for the relationship. The main caveat here really being the timeline, because if we're talking about the debilitation of clinical depression, that should end within about a year, right? So there are other factors at play. And I think that like ultimately the best thing for the relationship is for you to, you know, set some kind of limit, ask for help, and then like let him help you, because once he starts helping you, you can say thank you for doing this. And then he will feel good about himself, right? Because right now there isn't even an opportunity for him to feel good about himself. So like ask for something, let him do it, and then express gratitude and appreciation. So there are all kinds of things that like you don't have access to in this relationship. And it starts with sort of like, you know, setting some kind of limit, having a conversation, asking for something, and letting him kind of step up to the plate. And hopefully things work out. You know, I think it sounds like he's lucky to have you. And this is where everyone sort of assumes that she's not lucky to have him, where I think, did we even know that this is a woman? We just assume, I just had a heteronormative assumption there. So maybe it's a dude. So, you know, so like this person may be lucky to be dating this like this, the person who's suffering from depression. We just don't know.